How are we looking, everybody? Let's see. I can hear it on my phone, so that's good. Gonna chill here for just a few more minutes. Got 3 minutes till we start. Just gonna make sure everything looks all right. We don't need to make any last-minute adjustments, and then we'll get into it. All right, looking good, looking real good. Turn the other computer off. For those of you just tuning in, we're gonna wait about 2 more minutes here. Start at 7 once everybody piles in here. There we go. All right, let's see. I'll be watching the chat on my phone here, and I believe Matt is also going to be in the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop on in and ask away. If I don't answer it, while I'm talking, just aloud about everything, then I will definitely go through at the end and tackle each one in case we're running a little late on time, but we'll get it figured out. All right, about 1 more minute, we'll get started here. Let's close that. All right. Look at that thing. All right. Let's see, how many more seconds? Should we just get started? Yeah, let's just get started. All right, so here we have Delta. This is Hurricane Delta approaching the Yucatan Peninsula right now. It's a powerful Category 4 hurricane right now, and it definitely could be making a running Cat 5 here in a little bit. Right now, it's going through a little bit of a organization phase. You can see. Let's go down here and pause. This isn't going to be perfect. This is live, so I might stumble a bit. We might click back and forth between screens and stuff, but it's all going to be good information. And like I said, for those that are just now popping in, if you have any questions, throw them down in the comments. Matt will be answering them. I'll be answering them pertaining to anything, catastrophe deployment, hurricane, Q&A, how do they form, whatever you want to ask, go ahead and ask. We'll be here. So let's dive into it. This is Hurricane Delta, and we could see earlier we had some attempts at an eye. The original eye was very small. It was only I think it was 8 miles across, 6 to 8 miles across, which is very small. That's a pinhole eye. I mean, I would say, I'm not sure if there's necessarily a typical eye size, but usually they're going to be more on the order of somewhere between 15, 30 miles, even up to 60 miles wide in the larger ones, but probably about 15 to 30 is a bit more typical. Having one that's, 4 to 6, 8 miles across, that's pretty incredible. That means that there's a really tight inner core, and that inner core is very, very, very powerful, but the hurricane force winds also don't extend that far from that. When you have a larger eye, obviously, larger circumference, those hurricane force winds are going to extend quite a bit further out. But so anyways, you can see here earlier on attempts at that eye trying to clear out on satellite, but there's just so much continual thunderstorm growth that it's just not quite able to happen yet. And one thing that I'll pause right here and take a look at is there is potential that it's going to be redeveloping that eye. It's something called an eye wall replacement cycle. It's where that smaller, tight inner core actually basically evaporates as a newer one develops. That's the most basic way of explaining it. And when that happens, the wind field broadens and the storm gets bigger. Not necessarily stronger. It actually goes through a phase of weakening as it's making that transformation, getting rid of the old one and bringing in the new, larger one. This one might be about to do that, and it may not necessarily weaken because it's, when you're talking about a Category 4 hurricane, 5-10 miles per hour difference, not going to matter a whole lot, but it might be trying to go through that little eye wall replacement cycle right before it gets to the Yucatan Peninsula here. We do have some friends that are in Cancun. I don't know how they got down there last second because this was originally planned to go through Passway here in between Cuba and the peninsula, but it looks now like it's going to be making landfall just on the tip there, right where Cancun is, and a few storm chasers were able to make it down there last second. Apparently they're having issues because they're shutting the entire beach front down with all the large high-rise resort type deals, and those are obviously where you would want to be during something like this. So we'll see how they fare. That's going to be happening later tonight into tomorrow morning, and then it's off into the Gulf, and we have a few things that we're going to look at here first. This is the official track of or from the National Hurricane Center, showing a major hurricane going all the way up. Major hurricane means it's a Category 3 or higher. So obviously we have a Category 4 right now. It's expected to maintain strength throughout the life cycle all the way to the Gulf Coast. But there are going to be a few impediments that we're going to talk about here shortly. But we can see potential landfall time currently right now somewhere along the Gulf Coast is going to be late Friday night into Saturday morning. We'll see how slow it takes this jog to the west and the north. There's not a whole lot of I guess the easiest way to put it is there's not going to be a whole lot stopping this from getting stronger in the meantime, but eventually it is going to run into some obstacles. So let's talk about a few of those real quick. The first one is going to be the fact that we have had so many storms in the Gulf already. And when you have lots of storms going to the Gulf, it's going to upwell cooler water that's beneath those really hot sea surface temperatures, and then the upper ocean heat. It'll eventually kind of get filtered out when you have that many storms going and disrupting all the, just think about it. It's like going in a bathtub or something. You get a warm layer on top. If you swish it around, it's going to bring up the cooler stuff on the bottom. And that is what has happened throughout a majority of the Gulf. We can see here these lighter colors indicating still relatively warm temperatures. Like these kind of brighter colors are probably low 80s. When you get into the dark blues, that's probably like low 80s, upper 70s, which is still, it still can maintain a hurricane, at least the kind of lower 80s, low to mid 80s, which would be indicated by these brighter colors. But we can see these blues as it gets closer to the coast, and that's potential. That's going to be a potential for it to weaken. The thing that's interesting, though, is we'll go back here to the track. We can see how it's making this big westward jog. Originally, like we said, we thought it might be a little further east, going through this thoroughfare, and that would have had a further east journey, if you will, up until the northern turn, and that would have put it over some slightly cooler waters, those darker blue colors. Now that it's going further west, it's actually going to be going through the warmer temperatures, so it might not weaken a whole lot. Probably the biggest thing that's going to cause it to weaken first is just going over the landmass here, because when you go over a landmass, there's friction. It disrupts the vortex. The center is, you think of it like a stacked system, and when the surface center goes over that and there's a lot of friction, sometimes it can disrupt that circulation. You can get some displacement between the mid-level center and the low-level center. anyways, technical terms aside, the land disrupt it a little bit, so it's going to be going through a reorganizing phase once it gets off the Yucatan. But it's going to be doing it in those slightly warmer waters than if it had been further east here. So that makes it kind of tricky. What exactly is it going to do? Ultimately, we don't know for sure. It could have a lot more trouble than the models are predicting after it gets off the Yucatan Peninsula. We'll obviously have a much better idea by Thursday as to what type storm we're going to be looking at here on the Louisiana coast. But all indications right now are pointing to a pretty significant storm with not a ton of weakening, maybe just some slight weakening right before landfall as it gets into those much cooler water temperatures. So let's go ahead here. Let's take a look at some of the recon data. So we have planes flying around in here from the hurricane hunters. Let's see. Actually, we might not have a plane in there right now, but we'll go to the most recent one. So they're taking readings and they're dropping drop sounds, and we can see it's kind of been maintaining a steady pace right now. These numbers here indicate the minimum pressure, and we can see here 962, 957, 956, 957. So we went from a phase where it was rapidly dropping, a few millibars an hour, to now a pretty steady, consistent pace, which also goes back to what we were talking about with that potential eye wall replacement cycle where the eye expands and it kind of pauses its strengthening. That might be a good argument for that. And there's a few other things that indicate that, but we don't need to get that technical. So currently maintaining its strength, heading towards Cancun, and they're going to see some really significant impacts here shortly. Sorry, my throat's drying up. So these are spaghetti models. These are an ensemble of model forecasts that show the different variabilities between the different, large equations that go into these forecasts. This kind of tells us what is the model thinking, because when you look at it, say, let's go over here. We'll take this, we'll go to a forecast model, and we'll look at this, we'll click through it, right? And we see this singular path. Now, what helps us determine how accurate that path is going to be is by looking at things like these ensembles, because this is only going to put out the main output. This is only going to put out the one single output that is the primary one, and that's all it shows, which can be misleading if there's a lot of variability. So we'll click through this. We can see pretty close to what those spaghetti models are showing. And we have a tight gradient between all of these. If you remember storms like Sally, these were all over the place, even when it was much closer to land. And that indicated how much variability there was in the forecast, just because, the picture model shows it going one direction. That may not be the case because there's so much uncertainty. But with this, we have quite a bit of certainty and have for quite some time. It's just been very slight minor nudges. And that's just primarily because we were still in the development phase yesterday. I mean, we went from a tropical storm to a Category 4 hurricane in like 30 hours, which I think broke a record. So that's really impressive. And as it was going through that strengthening phase, organization phase, the models were getting more locked on to where that center of circulation would be and how quickly it would evolve. Now that we have a very well-developed storm and the models are this locked in, it's looking pretty, I'd say almost certain that Louisiana is going to be taking the impact on this one. I'd be surprised to see a huge shift unless something really unforeseen happens. But the models have been really consistent on Louisiana for the past day or two, and we can see, like I was talking about, all those members are really close together. We don't have them spreading out in a bunch of different directions where they're confused in the coming days. They're all pretty much tight together, which is that's definitely concerning, but it's good. It gives the people in the area some time to prepare, and hopefully that stays on course so that you don't have one of those situations where people evacuate and then turn up not needing to because it's going somewhere else. So We talked here about the ocean heat content. This is not sea surface temperatures, but it does show you pretty well why this thing got going so quickly. I mean, you just have really, really conducive environment here in the Caribbean, and yeah, Cancun they're going to be in trouble tonight. Hopefully they're able to get people to some suitable shelters, because it's probably going to be a Category 4, potentially brinking into the Category 5 territory, and it's looking more and more like a direct impact. And something to note here that I've talked about before, but it'll be good to show it right now. Let me close a few of these that we've already talked about. Let's go ahead here and zoom in. We'll do the H-Wharf model. This is so what you were just looking at there was a global model. That's just a large scale global features, but the hurricane models are more pegged towards mesoscale type events, smaller scale systems. So this particular model we have focusing on, there we go. We have focusing on Delta here. And one thing to note is it really does depend what side of the hurricane you're on, especially in one that's as compact as this one. This one is really compact. And when you're on the right side of the hurricane, the winds are stronger because you have onshore flow. The flow is coming from the southwest or from whatever direction it is, and it has nothing impeding it as it's going onto land. There's less friction over water than there is on land, so when it's coming straight off the water, the winds are a lot stronger. So that's why on this side of the hurricane, you're going to have more severe impacts. Also, think about it. It's pushing all of that surge, all that storm surge, all that water up right along the coastline. Now here on the left side of the storm, all that wind has already traversed the land and it's coming back around. It's encountered a lot of friction, so the winds are going to be potentially 10% less. On a big storm like this, not a terribly big deal, but I mean, you might see winds over here that are or at least gusts that are quite a bit stronger than you have on the left side of the storm. And right now it's pegging Cancun being in that what we call the right front quadrant. So that's concerning, and that would also bring the most amount of surge into it. If this was, a little bit further to the east, Cancun would not really have, well, they would actually still have surge because it's a peninsula, so it would be just coming in from a different direction. So they kind of get bombarded either way, but when it's coming along a coastline, it really depends on where you're at as far as, how much storm surge you'll get, and it really depends on what side of the hurricane that you're on. So we got some questions piling in here. Is this going to bring a bunch of rain or more winds? So this storm is going to have more on the wind and storm surge threats than the flooding threats, because it is moving at a pretty good clip. The thing that's taking it north is an upper level trough, or the jet stream, you can think of it. That's what's pulling it north. And it's going to do so rather quickly. These storms like Sally didn't really have much influence from the jet stream. They just kind of meandered slowly with the steering flow, and that's why they stuck around for so long and caused so much flooding. There will be some localized flooding with this, but it's going to get out of there pretty quick. I mean, we can go look at the 5-day forecast. 2 p.m. Friday, it's here. 2 p.m. Saturday, it's here. That's, a few 100-mile gap, whereas if you remember with Sally, it was like moving 1 to 2 miles per hour. I think this one's going to be moving more than, I think, like 15 miles per hour, I want to say. Don't quote me on that, but it's going to be moving significantly faster. So we're not going to see quite as much in the way of excessive inland flooding, but there is going to be the potential for storm surge right along the coast, which is extremely devastating, but it is confined relatively to the coastline. Something that I wasn't even thinking about talking about, but we should note. Let's go pull up Google Maps here. Let's talk about Louisiana and what would mean what as far as where it makes landfall. So one thing that I'm not going to do is talk about specific locations because it matters so much what the storm track takes over the next few days for that to be, even really truly discussed. Right now, it's definitely going to be somewhere along the coast. We think it's been pretty consistently showing on the coast of Louisiana. Things can change, but the consistency has been pretty good. So we're starting to feel pretty confident. But a few miles to the east or west could have severely different impacts for people in different spots. And one of the things I want to talk about is why it is kind of a good thing that it's making landfall in Louisiana. That sounds weird, but you think about a coastline that has a lot of dense population right up along the water's edge. Something like, Miami, Florida, or something like that. If you have a storm with a lot of storm surge coming directly into that, I mean, it's going to go straight into population densities with ease. But since it is making landfall in Louisiana, we do have, the bayou and quite a few barrier islands that are going to be protecting the mainland from that storm surge. And most of these major cities are about 10 to 15 miles inland. If we go to the track here, it's kind of we'll go to, I got rid of the spaghetti plots. Basically, it's honing in somewhere on central Louisiana as the landfall point for right now. Not saying it will make landfall there because they called this the cone of uncertainty for a reason. It could very well be on the right or left side of this cone where the center makes its landfalling point. But currently, it's looking like it's going to be somewhere in central Louisiana. And what am I doing here? We'll go back to Google Maps and we can see places like Houma, Morgan City, Franklin. They're all 10 to 15 miles inland, and we have this kind of bayou network deal, not a straight beach line that the storm surge can go right up onto. It takes a while for the water to make its forward progress, and it's highly unlikely that it would make it all the way into these communities. But depending on that angle, it might shove water up into these canals and stuff, which would potentially cause some flooding in places like Morgan City that are right along this river deal. I'm not sure. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. Let's see. Yeah, Cancun is not going to have a good time. But so, relatively speaking, it is kind of a good thing as far as storm surge goes that it's making landfall in an area that does not have dense population directly on the coast. We saw with Hurricane Laura in August the intense impacts from the landfall on Cameron and Holly Beach. And man, that they had like 15-foot surge, 17-foot surge, and it just wiped out a number of buildings. Really sad situation there. And these are really the very few communities that actually lie right along the water's edge. Many of these other communities are, like I said, 10 to 15 miles inland. So that's good for their sake. But we will still have to deal with the wind, obviously. Again, like I said, the friction of land helps the winds decrease a little bit, not completely, but it's gonna not be quite as intense as if you were right along the water's edge. So we might see a little tiny bit of wind reduction with these more inland towns, maybe on the order of 10 to 15 miles per hour less than it would be right along the water. So that's also a good thing. But if this thing comes a little bit further to the east, I mean, you could have significant impacts in New Orleans. If this thing comes a little bit further west, we could have another Laura type situation, which would just be disastrous for that area that's already been impacted so hard. So basically, the things to take away is that it's very confident that a relatively strong hurricane is going to be making its way towards the United States, most likely Louisiana, over the coming days. We will probably do another one of these before I head down, or maybe as I'm driving down. Right now, my current plan is to leave either Thursday night or very, very early Friday morning. Our best bet right now is to probably head to Lafayette and just kind of stage there and see where exactly the storm is going to be, because it's going to wobble a little bit, and we're going to have to, figure out what place we're going to be staying at by, Friday afternoon. as we're looking at an overnight landfall potentially into Saturday morning. So we're here in Norman, Oklahoma, central Oklahoma, about 9 hours away from our target area, and we will, like I said, we'll probably be heading down Thursday night or so. And right now it's looking like somewhere between Houma, Morgan City, Franklin. That's been kind of the more consistent track, but still a lot of time for that to shift. It has been slowly shifting a little bit west today, so hopefully not another Lake Charles type situation. They've had it bad enough already. Let's talk about hurricanes in October. It seems like, we're getting into October. It's starting to get cooler out. We're starting to get into fall. Seems like, hurricanes would not be as prevalent, but we have had some very significant hurricanes in October, and actually the most likely time for a Florida landfall over history has been in October, and that's because as the jet stream gets more active, you get a lot of storms that'll develop in the Caribbean here and then curve off to the east as those big jet stream patterns affect the storms. This one is getting affected by the jet stream, but it gets to make quite a bit of westward progress before it gets picked up by the jet stream and turned into Louisiana. So some other hurricanes that we can talk about. Obviously, we had Hurricane Michael. That was in 2018. That was a Category 5 that made landfall in the Florida Panhandle. The last Category 5 before that was Hurricane Andrew in 1992, so a very, very severe situation. Mexico Beach is still, as far as I know, barely recovered. It's not uncommon to see strong storms in October. We also had Matthew in 2016. It didn't make landfall as a major hurricane, but it came really darn close. We can see here it just skirted right along the edge of the coastline before making a brief landfall after it had weakened in South Carolina. But that was another very large potential disaster that was somewhat avoided. There was still some major damage in South Carolina, and they had quite a bit of flooding, if I recall correctly. And then back in 2005, we had Hurricane Wilma, which did, like I talked about, that kind of classic form in the Caribbean and then get scooped up by the jet stream and went into Florida as a Category 2, but it did reach Category 5 status while it was still in the Caribbean, and that did a number on Cancun as well. So let's go ahead and look. Yeah, so I wouldn't speculate too much on potential impacts and claim stuff quite yet. We might talk about that a little bit more once the storm is actually in the Gulf and we know what type of storm we're looking at. So I didn't mean to click on that, but we do definitely have some populated areas along the coastline here. And places like New Orleans are still going to see some effects. Places like Baton Rouge are still going to see some effects, even if it makes landfall, around the Morgan City area. All of these communities are going to be experiencing tropical storm to potentially low-end hurricane force winds, and these are all big population densities. So there's a lot at risk here. Thankfully, we don't have anything right along the coastline, such as a Galveston or a Miami, Charleston. We don't have any large major cities that are going to be right along the coastline sustaining the most intense, potentially Category 2, 3 winds once it gets to us. But a lot of large cities are going to have probably low-end hurricane force winds, tropical storm force winds, and rain, which is going to bring down trees, which is going to potentially cause some lower-end flooding. Probably still will be some flooding, but it'll be lower-end compared to Sally or obviously Harvey and stuff like that. But a lot of tree damage is going to be possible all throughout this area. Like we talked about, as this storm goes through potential eye wall replacement cycle, that hurricane force wind field is going to expand, and as it does that, it obviously has more impacts over a broader area. Right now, it's currently a buzzsaw. It's a small, compact storm. These bright colors indicate extremely vigorous thunderstorm development around that center, and it's just been so vigorous that it hasn't been able to clear out an eye completely, but we can see it here heading straight towards Cancun. Nothing in the way, nothing hindering it. The Gulf is very much primed for a hurricane. We do have the cooler waters close to the coast, which might cause some weakening right before it comes ashore, but it's going to be moving fast, so it's not going to have a lot of time to weaken. And all the other conditions that we look for they're there. There's a very moist profile throughout the Gulf. There isn't a lot of dry air that could feed into it and kind of choke it off. There's going to be some wind shear as it makes that northward curve, but it's moving fast enough where it's going to not have a ton of time to weaken. If this was moving a lot slower, it would have more time to weaken over those cooler waters with the wind shear coming in. But since it is moving as fast as it is, you're not really going to have a ton of time for it to weaken. And if it goes into the Gulf still as a Category 4 or 5 storm, I mean, sure, it's weakening as it's approaching the coast, but a weakening from a Category 4 or 5, I mean, that could still very easily be Category 3 at landfall. So we'll know a little bit more once it makes it over the Yucatan into the Gulf of Mexico. Like I said, we'll probably do another one of these live streams once we get to that point. So maybe Thursday night, Friday morning when I'm getting ready to head out, and I'll be doing live coverage as usual from down there. This time, this hurricane, we're actually going to be doing a live stream for a pretty extended period of time. Previously, we've done some short live streams, 5-10 minutes here, there. This one, we're going to be having one going for a couple hours. So you can tune in here to Adjuster TV to watch that. And if you're on the fence right now about getting any training, I mean, we have had a historic hurricane season. There is a ton of work out there. People are still being deployed for Sally, for Laura, and here we have another impending catastrophe in a similar area that has not had time to recover. So now's the time to get that last minute training in. You can go to Adjuster TV Plus. There's a lot of valuable training there that's going to help you, firsthand video that's going to show you exactly some of the things you'd be seeing out in the field. Lots of great information on there. We'll be going live with this storm later on, and anybody that's in Louisiana, now's the time to get prepared. Make sure you have an evacuation plan in store if it is going to be coming over your area. And if you are an adjuster in that area, because there's quite a few adjusters deployed in Lake Charles, you got to keep an eye on this thing, because it has potential to go a little bit further west of its track and go closer to Lake Charles, where a lot of people are stationed. So it's something to definitely keep an eye on. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and end it right now. Let's check and see if we have any additional questions. We got people working Isiais still. Yeah, people deployed for Laura, Sally, definitely going to be getting some claims. Yeah, I know of quite a few people, auto and property, that have been deployed down there and are still deployed. We have James Mathis, who is, partnered with IAPath and Adjuster TV. He just returned from about a month-long deployment, and I think that was by choice. I think he probably could have stayed down there longer if he wanted to. There's definitely a number of people that are down there, and there's not going to be a shortage of work by any means. So we've been going for 30 minutes exactly. I think that's probably a good time to go ahead and call it, unless, oh yeah, he did blow out his knee. I forgot about that. So we're going to go ahead and call it right now, but we will be back here in a few days once we have the storm closer to land. And thank you all so much for tuning in. Go ahead and head on over to AdjusterTV.com. Adjuster TV Plus is going to be your best resource for getting that last minute training if you're considering going down and being deployed on one of these storms. So anyways, guys, enjoy the rest of your night and stay safe along the Gulf Coast.